And it's a thing that you play very subtly. I mean, that relationship with Chloe, it could be a boss employee or friends, or, have some kind of implication that's not there, some romantic thing, but it's not at all. You play it so subtly that you really believe these two people working side by side respect each other's jobs and what they do.
Well, and the core root of that dynamic is trust.
Yeah.
And that's where, and trust is such a kind of enigmatic, huge concept, which is how it can blur the lines of, does he like her? Does he not like her? Why does he need her so badly? Is there something deeper going on between the two of them? And all of those things are just the layers of trust that when push comes to shove, that's the one person he can turn to.
Right.
And so what puts them at odds are the differences in their personality. I remember there was one line that just made me laugh so hard. I had Audrey Raines' character last year in season 4. Her husband, or estranged husband, died because I made a choice to save someone else, and I'm typing at the desk in the next scene frantically, and Chloe says, if you need someone to talk to, I'm there. And I gave her this look, and it was kind of the great balance of our relationship. As two people outside of this professional requirement, we probably would never have shared 2 words. But,
right.
And that's, again, I think the writers have done a fantastic job kind of overlaying that kind of interesting character development with this huge crisis as a backdrop.
Right. It seems like this season, one of the central supporting characters for you has been Peter Weller's character, Henderson, as his former mentor, as Jack's former mentor, and a guy who's gone, super patriot extremist.
Right. And how misguided that can be.
Yeah. And it's almost as if Henderson is a version of Jack, what Jack could have, or maybe still could become.
Yeah.
Did you look at it that way?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think the second they drew the line and the connection between the two of us in the training, and the history, and that we were best friends and that we were partners, you could see how people could go down that route.
Yeah. It's not something you even see very much in American television or movies. It's more like, it reminded me of like a John le Carré novel where there's the mentor who betrays the spy that he brought along.
Well, in many ways very similar to Marlon Brando's character in Apocalypse Now, is the person that, Jack Bauer fights through his bureaucracy in one level, and Peter Weller's character chose another, Henderson chose another.
Right.
I think ultimately over all of the years that we've been doing the show, bureaucracy seems to be the #1 enemy that audiences have gravitated to, and I wish we could do it just like that.
Right.
I mean, thank God we don't,
right.
to be honest with you. I mean, we have an incredibly sophisticated and advanced legal system for a reason, and due process is one of the founding staples of this nation, and I think one of the reasons why it is great. But there is that kind of very fantastical element that we can't help but appreciate.
Right.
About just driving straight to the point and dealing with it.
Yeah, and I think that's what people get such a rush with your character, because Jack is a kind of classic American hero. I mean, you could go back to, Raymond Chandler's detective heroes, to James Fenimore Cooper, that kind of the American loner who takes things into his own hands, yet Jack is also compromised to some extent because he works for the government. He has aligned himself with the government.
Well, it's like Shane.
Yeah.
Shane doesn't want to be a gunfighter. He's trying to do the right thing, but ultimately this is what he knows, and he goes back to what he knows.
Right. So it really adds tension, because you feel this certain loyalty, and it's interesting the way that's shifted, where the relationship that you had with the Palmer character is very, very, obviously very, very different from the character you have with Logan.
Yeah.
Speaking of whom, it's just great to see somebody like Gregory Itzin, who, this familiar face you've seen for years, get this role that he's just sunk his teeth into.
Oh, and has had so much fun. He does this thing when he's working that is so extraordinary. He starts talking to himself in between the takes.
Really?
Oh, yeah, out loud now. I mean, we have an amazing crew, first off, and our crew has created an environment for the actors that is so comfortable, and So deeply grateful for that, because it's so hard to try stuff in front of people that you're not comfortable with or that you don't know. But yeah, he just starts talking to himself out loud, and then I'm going to hit that line like this, and da-da-da-da. Yeah, you guys ready? Come on, let's go. And he has an energy and an excitement about what he's doing. And it re-inspired me as an actor. That's what it's supposed to be about. If you're not this excited to be doing this, which is such a privilege and a gift
right.
to be able to do, then you should take a break.
Yeah.
And so he kind of became infectious for all of the actors. I know that he and Gene Smart had such a great working relationship. And when I first read in episodes 1, 2, and 3, and 4, some of the dynamics of that relationship and where those characters were going, if you read it on paper and then took a look at what they did with it, without changing anything, just by intention, by working as an actor, that was such a dicey, dangerous line that they were towing, and they did it beautifully. And so, for me, one of the great things about season 5 was that they really did. I think they were the great shift in the show this season, and that the other storylines, the multiple storylines that the writers have done such a beautiful job in developing, I think we figured out this year that they can have the same weight. They can equally be balanced, and they certainly prove that, certainly, at least to me.
Yeah. It seems to me like one of the differences between last season and this one is that last season you had this kind of threat from without, this Muslim terrorist group, and even though this season began with this kind of the Russian, the Chechenian separatists, it's become much more of a kind of American born and bred conspiracy.
Absolutely. And what I loved about what they chose to examine, which is something that we've been dealing with in this country for a very long time, but I think certainly between Enron and gas prices and everything else, I think they've taken a serious look at how much of the problems that we're facing abroad and domestically are actually created within the structures of our own government, and at what point is enough, and what becomes good capitalist endeavors, and where does that cross over into a kind of greed that is just so egregious and wrong, that it's to the detriment of the country and this country's population. And I think the show has made a real effort. I mean, the whole Chechen thing, was really based on oil and trying to create a problem that would allow you access to that commodity or to that resource. I thought that was a very bold thing for them to start out with. And regardless of the writer's politics or my politics, it doesn't shape necessarily their interest in what they're delving into and writing about for the show.
Yeah.
Which I have a huge respect for, because that's not an easy thing to do.
Right. Yeah, there is that talk. The show seems, particularly this season, to have been taken up both by conservatives and liberals in the media. Pat Buchanan called called President Bush the Jack Bauer in the War on Terror. And I wondered, wow, what does KIEFER Sutherland think of that?
Well, for the most part, I kind of keep my politics to myself and vote where I can. I don't solely agree with that comment. I certainly, but the show is up for interpretation by a wide variety of people. I've also heard other people call it a searing indictment of what American politics have become and where they stand exactly right now.
Right. I'm Frank Rich in the New York Times will defend the show, in completely the opposite direction. And I love the way last week there was even that line about this is how things happen in the real world as opposed to the op-ed pages of the New York Times. It was just a great sort of thing to toss in there to make people, connect to that, to the real world.
Right. But again, and I keep coming back to the writers, the fact that you can have Frank Rich taking one side and Buchanan taking another is a real testament to, again, this concept of flexibility within the context of the writing, and